Welcome back, folks, to episode 12 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills and Self-Improvement Project podcast with your host, me, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and also adjunct professor at a local community college and a longtime researcher in martial arts and complementary and alternative medical methods. The topic that we're going to discuss today is going to be what I'm calling emotional blindness. Now, this is something that we all experience at some point in time. And what we have to start to focus on whenever we're under stress, and what I'm going to be doing, my goal with this today is to save you some emotional pain and maybe some potential arguments and misunderstandings in the future. But I'm also hoping that you'll have that face palm onto the forehead type of experience where you say, dang, I wish I could have that back, because you may realize that you've experienced this in a very physical sense in your life on more than one occasion. And it might seem like it's an embarrassment the way I described it, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of things that we do that become embarrassing when we become aware of the fact that there's some simple things at play that often we're not aware of, or we weren't taught. In fact of the matter, it doesn't matter how adult or how grown our family, parents, grandparents are, they may not have known about it either. So my goal is to educate and help, but also just because you get it as an adult, if you're a parent here, or even an individual without children, or maybe as a teen or a kiddo, you can benefit from it now. It's not anything that you have to mature into to make use of. So it's a very powerful tool of understanding, but also one of strategic timing that can make a difference in a situation that may or may not have cost you a relationship in the past, a friendship, or maybe even cause an argument or conflict. And we have to understand that whenever we're discussing this today, this isn't about you and what's wrong with you, but rather what is lacking information-wise and maybe the person we may have conflict or argument with or misunderstanding. And myself, that means that the physiological things that we're discussing now, they are self-regulation skills, but they're also tools to help us recognize and to help regulate, not control someone else, but to regulate how other people may respond to us as well, and things we can do to help alleviate such situations so that way maybe we don't shoot an important relationship in the foot, this sort of thing. So without further delay, emotional blindness. What is this? Well, first off, we have to recognize that when we are under stress inside the brain, this is just a little bit of neuropsych. There's been a lot of research on this. The amygdala is kind of like a relay station for those things that are fear-induced or hedonically related, having to do with those things that we approach and avoid. It's kind of like a crossroads of sorts. And we don't have to get into all the minutiae and details of neurotransmitters and connectors and stuff like this. Just know that the amygdala is actually a Latin-based term that says that it is almond-shaped, named after an almond because of the shape of the structure itself. And that's where the term amygdala comes from. You look up amygdala on Google and you get all kinds of fear response stuff. That's cool. There's a lot of good, accurate stuff out there. But often there's a lot of misunderstanding. Think it is only fear-based, and it's not. But much of what we have to do, approach, avoid, may come at a price, because whenever we have chronic stress, chronic anxiety, frequent pain, injury due to illness, or maybe even back pain that's chronic, that is sharp-shooting pain that conditions us to shirk and respond a little bit, we have that depressing of the body. We call that learned helplessness sometimes, because we can't run away from pain in our body. And sometimes we start doing things maladaptively, like turning to drugs to help numb things, and also turning to alcohol, this sort of thing, to depress and numb those feelings that we would have, or maybe even help us to feel more socially graceful. That's why they call alcohol a social lubricant, so to speak. But whenever those things and their effects run or go away, what happens? The benefits go too, but then we have the toxin that we have to clear out. But once again, back to the amygdala, we have frequency of pain signal going through it. Just like anything else, we get really skilled and we develop neural pathways and new connections if we have frequency of pain, frequency of ugly or discomfort, or things that are ambiguous and cloudy and that are unclear that make us feel like we don't know what to do. We tend to be building more pathways to support that, meaning by default, we're considering our environment as an unsafe and mostly dangerous or potentially dangerous place. Because of that, we know that the amygdala in structure actually does grow. It doesn't get huge, but it morphologically gets bigger, which means it has more potential because of mass and default by mass, more connections than otherwise would have been it had it not grown because of such influx of great signals of pain and discomfort and fear. So keeping that in mind, we're going to drop the neuropsych stuff and go to the functional aspect of this. So why is it that we're talking about emotional blindness? Well, often whenever we have a situation that is dynamic, whether we be walking with somebody and having an argument, or we're in a domestic setting at home and maybe having a disagreement with a friend, a loved one, a spouse, or a child, this sort of thing. Whenever the volume of the voices go up and movement starts getting more abrupt, we start signaling to the body that there is stress or potential threat, especially if somebody starts moving in a manner that is agitated or shouting right in front of us, or wherever a voice gets really shrill, like screams or yelling. And those things will trigger our body to go into the beginnings of fight flight, even though you may higher conscious prefrontal cortex think that's my spouse, those are my children, they're not trying to hurt me or kill me. The suddenness and the abruptness of activity and sound can trigger those self-defensive, self-protective, self-centric, my organism is in dangerous programs. So keeping this in mind, once again, the emotional insensitivity that we'll call emotional blindness has to do with not you knowing what the emotions are, because you do, but whenever the blood flow starts shifting towards the physical body, we get stronger. Remember from the earlier episodes about the hemodynamics of cognition, the blood flow starts leaving the frontal part of our brain because it's slow. Whenever things become physically, externally faster, more abrupt, and whenever we start seeing signals of what could be considered aggression, not violence per se. Whenever we see a dog that's baring teeth, or we're baring teeth, or somebody's grimacing, not so different, we're noticing that physiologically, physically palpable, touchable, if I reach out and squeeze their muscles, they're going to be really tense. Actual evidence for that sort of stress in my environment, my body's going to respond to protect itself, and we become very self-centric, not egocentric. Self-centric as in self-protective in the sense of wanting to stay alive. Even though you may not feel like you're in danger or threat, the very beginnings of those programs start firing off. We start interpreting signals differently. We start defaulting to not what people are saying, but more so what are they doing? And body language becomes king. Whenever we discuss a percentage, once again, the one that I use is very close to what the others use. And I use this one because the difference between the other percentage models and the one I use are very little. So they're largely accurate, regardless of which one you prefer to use. But if any communication that we have is 50% body language influence and 43% what it sounds like, and right now we haven't even been discussing what the code or the message was. What were they saying? But how they were delivering it, how tense were they physically? What did they sound like when they were saying that? Were they yelling? Were they screaming? Were they saying it in a way that was snarky and irritating? Those are the two things that make up 93% of the influence of the message that they were giving us. And maybe we were doing the same. That makes whatever they're saying the code, the last 7% or the 100%, almost useless. And if we don't trust somebody, that means we're communicating as a default. And what I mean by this is that there is no trust. When there is no trust, your communication is not rapport. people speak about developing rapport, having rapport, gaining rapport, breaking rapport. Whenever our body's under stress or we're in conflict, we are often in danger of breaking rapport. That means trustworthy communication and also communication with somebody whom we trust. We tend to pull that back because our interpretation of them is aggressive, tense. I don't know if I can believe what they're telling me. And it's not so much that you are being unloyal. There is a biological, physiological underpinning to this feeling of I can't trust them. You're not pulling away because you're unethical and rude or you're trying to hurt them by not trusting them. You physically cannot tell the difference when the heart rate gets up to close to about 140 beats a minute and over when we're really under stress, when our anxiety goes up, or if we're in pain, we have a sharp pain, a searing pain, or if we're frightened or shocked by something suddenly jumping out at us, when our heart starts to trip hammer, that means it's pushing a lot of blood with lots of pressure that says run, run, don't be here, be there instead. There, where's 60 seconds dead run from here on the other side of the football field there versus where I'm at right now. So in that context, this is where we're speaking of emotional blindness. I'm unable to interpret what the facial body language is. Now, whenever I'm under stress and someone else is not, this is where the term emotional blindness really starts to shine in the sense that I can be very tense, I can be very active, I can be having a good time. Once again, having a good time at the birthday party, jumping in the bouncy house. It's an amazing picture, lots of fun, but your heart rate is up and you're physically excited and you're by default skeletal muscle dominant, not dependent, but dominant, in the sense that you're physically jumping. That means your muscles and what you do with your body are the priority, not 1 + 1 = 2 or doing your calculus homework. You do that later when you cool off and then your blood flow starts to balance out throughout the body where you get more to your brain. And you can do deep thinking about deep thoughts on mathematics if that's what you like to do. But until then, if you're physiologically under stress, by default you're skeletal muscle dominant, which means that's where the blood flow is, largely. But that also means that our lower brain structures are probably driving, which means we're more perceptually dominant, meaning what I take in through my visual. I can't interpret facial body language, but yet I can still see the face, and I don't know what they mean, and I can't trust what they're showing me as far as demonstrating affection, because if they're smiling at me, I may take it very self-centrically. Like, what are they looking at? Why are they smiling at me? Are you laughing at me? These are things we hear often with people that have panic anxiety or fear. They start questioning things and they say things like that, even though the person that's smiling may be absolutely authentic and sincere. Their ability to interpret facial body language is shut off, just like a switch, because it is not necessary to interpret somebody's smile in a survival situation, in the sense that it's a life or death thing. What it does leave room for is for us to be able to interpret motion, physical motion. Are they physically aggressing? Are they getting bigger in my mental or visual picture, which means they're getting close really fast? Or are they moving away? Or are they moving in a way that makes me feel nervous, agitation, twitchy, really fast, staccato motion? Those are the things that we're left with to interpret whether or not the situation is safe for us physically. And from that foundation, this is where we're going to speak about some of the physiology of the eye and what happens when we become emotionally insensitive, emotionally blinded. So if we were ever, for instance, going to a grocery store or shopping somewhere, and you probably had this experience, I have many times, and I kind of laugh now once I figured out what it was that was going on. Most folks aren't aware of it because it happens so quickly. But whenever we're seeing somebody coming in the store while we're leaving, and have you ever walked literally right past somebody and said hi or waved at them, but they walk by like you don't exist? Their nose is in the air, their chin is sticking out a little bit, mind you, they are moving and they're pushing a shopping cart. And they're moving not really abruptly or quickly, but at a decent clip, but not slow. And they're not turning their eyes left and right. their eyes are kind of fixed on the horizon, almost like they're looking with their nose up a little bit farther away, almost like they're trying to look over something, the farthest end of the store. Whenever we start physically moving, we tend to move towards that tunnel vision where our peripheral vision starts to narrow. Have you ever walked by somebody and then you stop them and say, hey, and it's almost like you shake them out of a trance? Or they'll look at you and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. And they legitimately did not see you. Now, they were looking in the direction of where their goal was, but they didn't see you because you were to the periphery. So that was not necessarily, if they're moving, a survival priority. So those bits of information are being taken in, but not at the conscious level, other than what they're mentally focusing on. Often many people have walked by and they're making decisions based on what they saw. Well, that was rude of them. Oh, that person stuck up. And wow, I can't believe they ignored me. Often it's not an intentional person ignoring you, but rather they couldn't perceive you consciously as you walk by them. But we socially will interpret things very quickly, add a narrative, and say, they ignored me. How would I know this? Because I've tested it often. Many times, whenever I was in undergrad and grad school working in retail, this situation played out many, many times. I've tested it so frequently in my own, and I've talked to other people educated on them, and they would say as much. But often, people did not see them. They were not aware of them. They saw them, but they were almost like what people are now using the term an NPC, almost like they were a non-issue. They were busy playing their game. Their goal was getting to whatever survival goods they were going to get, whether it be toilet paper during COVID or maybe some food or going to get some shoes or something. But that was their goal. That's what they had in their mind, and trying to find the place that they needed to get to complete their quest, so to speak. But the people around them were NPCs, not dead necessarily, but they were things that were just like peripheral outlying information that had no significance on what they were doing. But it wasn't because you were not significant as an individual in their life, maybe, but rather in that state, if we look out to our periphery, we realize that things look more flat, a little less detailed, so a little less recognizable. Whenever you see somebody clearly, you're looking directly at them with what's called foveal vision. The fovea is the very little dot wherever the optic nerve comes in the back of the eye and the retina, wherever we actually interpret signals of light and make sense of them and call that sight. The non-foveal is outside of that does not fall on that little optic nerve, that little space in the back of your eye, on the inside of your eye, where the light falls on. And the perception of light and movement comes from the outside edges of where the fovea is, and it's called non-foveal vision. But that has nothing to do with clarity, but more from picking up motion. So whenever we're hyperfoveally focused, that means we're looking forward, seeing clearly with 3D depth. If you're within that tunnel of their tunnel vision, they're going to recognize you and see you. But if you're to the side and they're looking in that distant nose up in the air, misinterpreted as being stuck up while they walk by you, unless you shake them or talk to them or put your hand in front of their face, not directly in front of their face like the face hugger, but rather in their middle vision, they're probably not going to pick you up in their visual sense. And it's going to seem like they ignored you, but they didn't. So why is this so important? I'll tell you why. Because often we have probably had people do that and we judge them harshly. And they don't even know that it's happening to them, but yet we're judging them as being stuck up and ugly. We may even have gotten mad and said, hey, I saw you at the store. You totally ignored me. And they're like, no, I didn't. So if they were in that hyperfoveal space, did they consciously do that? Well, probably not. But we being humans and the information gatherers, as far as we can tell, like to think that what we're thinking is accurate and better because, well, I did it. I thought of this, and it made sense to me. not everything is as it seems, and things are much more subtle and deep than we've ever thought sometimes. There's been quite a number of studies on the peripheral vision and what is called inattentional awareness. There was a rather elegant study that was done. It was really fun, and if you look it up on YouTube and on the internet and even on some of the databases, it's still there. And I'm going to give the title of it. It was one of the first and most fun of the studies that I'd looked at when I was an undergrad that really pushed me forward into the perceptual side of psychology, what we interpret as signal and make thought with. But the name of the study was Gorillas in Our Midst, MIDST, kind of a takeoff on the term from the movie Gorillas in the Mist. But what was funny is that they had students bouncing basketballs, walking around in a circle in front of an elevator. And of course, students were doing what they were told. And when they were doing various activities, they had a lady in a white dress walk through the middle of them that came out of the elevator. Some noticed, some did not. And then there was a person in a gorilla suit that did the same, walk through them, and some perceived the gorilla suit person, some did not. But the fact of the matter, when they were physically in motion, this foveal focus, hyperfocus, to the surprise of the researchers, they realized that we don't see as well as we like to think we do. And they had everything recorded on video, and it was amazing. So just to illustrate what we're talking about, they were just kind of showing how we are aware and unaware at times, depending on what we're doing, and how sometimes we can be hyperfocal to the detriment of those things and those people around us. And sometimes it can even mean that we don't hear as well as we otherwise would, especially if we're really engrossed in what we're doing. Why is this so important? Well, the goal is to help educate you, if you're not aware of this, but also to have you think, well, has this happened to me in the past? May have, has to me, but also it's a tool to help you alleviate any potential of a break in relationships not meaning to, or maybe at least giving somebody a fair shake when they say, well, I really didn't see you, not meaning to harm you, and hopefully preserve some relationships moving forward. Because I've seen this destroy quite a few things over time that we would call really worthwhile relationships based on a misunderstanding that was physiological. Yes, more so physiological than it was bad character or somebody being unethical or immoral. Just a misunderstanding. So there's some important information there. And I think it's rather important that we learn to recognize in ourselves those symptoms of stress, anxiety, and pain, and how they, in effect, can cause us to misinterpret things and how we see them. And often why we don't trust the authenticity of somebody smiling at us whenever we're in those states. And it's not that we don't, or because we're bad, or because we're angry, but also in the same breath, because maybe we're in pain, or we're feeling angry, or stressed, or feared, we're physiologically unable to interpret emotional body language as well. Rarely does it get to the absolute zero, I can't tell. But also, if I don't trust, that means I'm not having good bonding feelings with somebody, even though I know them. That's why sometimes it's really hurtful when we love and care for somebody and they're like, I'm just not feeling it. And it's almost like we're being robbed of a kind familial experience. And that takes a little time. If it's a sudden shock or pain, think about this. When we have adrenaline in our system, that shuts off our emotional sensitivity. Turns on, in quotes, the emotional blindness once again. Flexing my air quotes on that one. But also, that lasts for a time. Sometimes 48 hours to 72 hours, depending on the severity. And sometimes being away from somebody allows us to reestablish that, or else we may feel triggered or re-traumatized. And this doesn't always have to go to the level of trauma, but if someone has post-traumatic stress symptoms, not necessarily disorder level, but after you've had traumatic response or a shock, it takes a little while. You have to have a little time. About 48 to 72 hours is roughly when it is a very rough distance. It can vary depending on how quickly you metabolize, and also age may have something to do with our resilience and our bounce back on this. But if our bounce back goes back to a baseline of having pain or chronic fear or agitation or anxiety, it may take longer, and it may start looking like a trait resembling depression, anger, or anger outbursts. So that's a lot of information packed into a little bit, but very crucial. And I'm hoping that this will help you in the future. And I'm really hoping that you can share this with people that you know. So maybe, just maybe, we can prevent any losses of any relationships that are important to us, preserve those relationships that are important to us moving forward, and maybe help reestablish those that maybe, due to misunderstanding, we let go of. And with that, like, follow, and share. Oh, P.S. Side note, a little correction of myself. I have been giving y'all the wrong email. The email that I would like y'all to send comments to or any questions to me for future podcasting, any suggestions and feedback are absolutely welcome. I'd love to hear from you. But the email is actually runningmangetsskillsproject@gmail. I was giving you the email without the word project in it, but once again, it's runningmangetsskillsproject@gmail. So if you have any communication or contact you'd like to make, please do. I certainly welcome it. Love to hear how you're doing and if these tools are helping you. And if you have any suggestions for any future podcast recordings, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. All the best. Follow, like, share, and let's move forward and not be emotionally blind, but become emotionally aware, not just in ourselves, but those around us. And if you have little ones, teach them this stuff. It really helps them get along better and make better relationships. And I wish I had this when I was younger. It would make me really kung fu at it by now. I'm still learning. All the best. You take care. Bye.